ton of information here. Going to go pretty fast, so stop me if you've got a question. I'm going to talk about cover crop species because we've been talking about a lot of these different things, and cover crops are one of the ways to get a lot of these things into the soil, into the ground. And you know the things that you're using, but I'm going to introduce you to some other things that, you know, maybe will work, maybe won't. But it's so cool to know that God created this huge diversity of plants, and they each have a purpose, and they each have a reason. So I'm going to go through these. I'm probably going to skip over the warm season ones, or at least go through them fairly quickly, because if you're planting mostly fall planted cover crops, which it sounds like you're doing here, you know, the warm season things aren't really going to necessarily work for you. So first of all, I want to just show you, these are some of the cover crops that we carry. This isn't an exhaustive list, but it is some of them. And I have it grouped, clovers of course are legumes, but we have so many different clovers, I gave them their own category. So we've got legumes, including the clovers, grasses, and brassicas. And the thing that I want you to see is that everything from here over is in 3 plant families, because all legumes are in 1 plant family, and all of the grasses are in 1 plant family, and then all of these brassicas are 1 plant family. So you could plant 15 different things from here, but you still only have 3 plant families. And as you listen to Christine Jones and John Kemp and, you know, these really smart people, they're going to tell you that that's not really where you want the diversity to come from. You need additional plant families to really get that functional diversity of what's going on in your soil. When we get over here, these 2 are the same plant family, different. Okay, so we need to start thinking about adding some of these if you really want to get that plant family diversity in addition to species diversity. So we'll work our way through this. So legumes, everything's in the Fabaceae family. Just a couple of warm season ones, you know, if you are growing a summer crop. And so the warm seasons, where the warm seasons could potentially work, if you're trying to graze animals all year round, you know, like you're doing some grass-fed beef, if you need something to be grazing in the summertime, then you may utilize some of these. So there's some really good warm season legumes like cowpeas and mung beans. Soybeans actually is a great cover crop if you aren't growing soybeans in your cash crop rotation. It's a terrible idea if you got soybeans as part of your rotation, because we don't want to vector those diseases and those insects. But for people that are just grazing, or if you're in an area that they're not growing a lot of soybeans, we use it for a cover crop as well. Sun hemp, if you want something that just loves the heat, it's a very tropical plant. We've seen this thing produce 180 pounds of nitrogen in 60 days. You know, get 6-7 feet tall in 60 days. Fantastic cover crop for that. But if you're not summer planting, it's not going to work because it needs hot, warm soils. All right, then as we get into the cool season legumes, of course, hairy vetch, you know, Zeb brought this up. We love hairy vetch. It is by far the most reliable overwintering cover crop, legume cover crop that there is. Now here, your winters aren't nearly as harsh, so you've got other options that can work as well. But like we probably are the largest hairy vetch grower in North America. We contract almost 5,000 to 6,000 acres of hairy vetch production, and it's all in Canada, Montana, the Dakotas, because winter hardiness comes from 2 things. 1 is genetics, so you gotta have good genetics, and then 2 is where was it grown? Because if it can survive a Canadian winter, I'm pretty confident that it can survive Nebraska and other places. So there's lots of different varieties. It is a little more expensive seed. And here's the reason why. Because if you've ever grown hairy vetch, I often tell people it's the easiest crop you'll ever grow. It's the hardest crop you'll ever harvest. Because it is so indeterminate, which means it continues to flower even after it has mature pods. You've got pods that are so mature they're popping open and the seed is dropping on the ground and the plant is still blooming. Which makes it for a great cover crop. It stinks though to try to harvest it, because of that indeterminacy. And so that's why seed is expensive, Because if you can get 50% of what you produce in the grain tank, you're doing really, really good. A lot of guys may get a third of it. So that's why that seed is expensive, because of that great indeterminacy. But I don't want to see that bred out of it, because that indeterminate feature makes it a great cover crop, because it will grow for as long as you need it to grow. It blooms for a long period of time. So we really like hairy vetch. A lot of people don't like it because they say, well, it's got hard dormant seed. And I plant hairy vetch, I'm going to have that stuff coming up for years. And it's true, older varieties of hairy vetch can have up to 20% hard dormant seed, which means it doesn't come up when you plant it. It's going to come up next year, or 2 years, or 3 years down the road. And that can be a real pain, depending on what your rotation is. But the newer varieties are way, way better. Way better. And you know, now we're seeing hairy vetch hard dormant seed counts of less than 10%. And once you run them through a cleaner, get a good hard cleaning on them, you know, maybe 3%. And the best hairy vetch you can get is stuff that's a year old. If you get hairy vetch that was from the previous crop season, it's not uncommon to see 0% hard dormant seed. That's what you want. You want all those seeds to come up when you plant them, unless you're in a pasture situation. So anyway, there's newer varieties that are being bred. There's good genetics. This is one of the plants that actually is having some research dollars put into breeding new varieties. They know which genes code for the hard seed, and so now they're working on trying to get some of those switched off. Common vetch would also work for you guys here. It's quite a bit cheaper. It doesn't have any hard dormant seed. It's not as aggressive of a grow. It's going to be a little bit, it's not going to be as viney as hairy vetch. And again, you may want that, you may not. The seed size is larger, however. So even though it's cheaper, if you're looking at how many seeds you're getting per acre, you know, common vetch is probably still a little bit cheaper, but the cost offset is the cost is offset by the seed size. But common vetch would work, you know, it should work fine for you guys here for overwintering. The plants look pretty similar. Like I said, the common vetch is not as viney, and it won't survive Nebraska winters, but it should be okay for you guys here. So that may be an option if you're looking to cheapen that up a little bit. And then of course peas, you know, we love peas. We use a lot of winter peas, a lot of spring peas. They grow pretty quickly. They're very viney. You get lots of biomass if you're looking at just lots and lots of biomass. We love peas for that. Larger seed size, however, so, you know, as you're putting your mixes together, you have to determine, especially if you're putting it through a planter, you have to be concerned about seed size. However, like the winter peas, they're quite a bit smaller. If you think about a soybean being 3,000 seeds per pound, a regular yellow field pea, they're like 1,800 to 2,000 seeds per pound, so much larger. But the forage peas that we use are about 4,000 seeds per pound, so they're smaller than a soybean. And then some of these winter peas can be 5,000 or 6,000, so they're like half the size of a soybean if you get a lot of these winter pea varieties. So it kind of depends. There's a wide range, but we love peas. And as I talk about these legumes, you have to get the right rhizobia strain, because each of these different types have their own set of unique rhizobia biology. But peas and lentils and vetch all share the same one, so you can use one type of inoculant and it will work for both your peas and your vetch. Faba beans, has anybody here tried faba beans? No, it'd be interesting to see if they would overwinter for you. I don't know if they would or not. The great thing about, so fabas are a true bean, and they're the only true bean plant that will tolerate cold, wet soils. And so you could, if you could get them to overwinter, they would grow well in your cold, wet soils in the spring. And the great thing about these things is when they're a bigger stem, they're going to be a big hollow stem, so they would snap right off with a roller gripper really easily. And probably within 48 hours, almost that entire plant is going to turn almost completely black. It's the weirdest thing you've ever seen, because we've had them in our plots and you step on them, you break one off, come back a couple days later and that thing is just black. So this would be a great one if you could have them in your mix and you terminate that, you know, when you plant, then that, you know, it's going to turn black and that's just going to draw heat into your soil to help those plants emerge. So this is one that I think you should be looking at. Even if it doesn't overwinter, it would be really interesting if you could, do an early spring seeding of these, in a strip right where you're going to plant your corn or your cotton to see if you can warm that up. So let me know if you're interested. I can get you some samples. Fabas are typically, these are made for the human consumption market. Anything made for that is large seed. So we've got two varieties that have smaller seed. They're still pretty big compared to a lot of other things, but they're very small for a faba. So this would be one that you could definitely look at. Clovers, you guys are very familiar with crimson. We can't get crimson to overwinter. I've seen it overwinter maybe 3 times in the last 15 years in Nebraska. And it all has to do whether we get good snow cover, because we're going to spend some time, in the 10 to 20 below zero range. And if we don't have snow on the ground, that's the end of the crimson clover. If we have snow on the ground, it'll survive 30 below. That just doesn't always happen. Crimson is great. Love crimson. If you can use it, it's a fantastic clover. Balanza would be another one you guys could consider here. It's got even more winter hardiness. I've seen nothing grow faster than Balanza clover when it decides it's time to start growing. It's really slow out of the gate, but once it takes off and grows, it will actually outgrow and outproduce crimson. So again, that might be one that you should at least experiment with to see what it would look like here. These other ones, if you're going to do any summer, something that's going to grow more into the summer, these Mediterranean types, Berns and Persian could be good options. Some of the Persians could overwinter for you, and Frosty Berns could. But they're going to be more expensive. This is where I would look for you guys, these two right here. Hubam sweet clover. If anybody has bees, you should be planting some of this. Bees absolutely love this. It's an annual sweet clover, tolerates heat really well, and will bloom the same year you plant it, where most sweet clovers are biennial. They have to go dormant and then come back the next year. This will bloom the same year. So this is a great one if you have bees. And then of course perennial clovers, red, white, yellow. If you're grazing, if you got pasture situations, or again, if you want pollinator strips or you have bees, these would be some pretty good options there. Then we get into the grass family. So again, I know I'm going really fast. I'm happy to give you copies of these slides, or we've got recordings of this online as well. So the grass family contains all these different things. We're all pretty familiar with this, and again, these warm season ones, if you've got livestock, you definitely should be looking at, Sudan grass or forage sorghum, or they take the two of those and they can cross them, and this is what most people would plant, would be sorghum Sudan, which is one parent Sudan grass, one parent forage sorghum. They cross them. They get kind of the best of both worlds. The cool thing about these are that, there's a lot of commercial production on this for forages, so there's a lot of money and research that goes into developing new genetics all the time. There's no GMO sorghums. They're all non-GMO. They're all non-GMO traditional plant breeding, but they can do a lot of hybridizing of these, and so they've got traits like VMR, brown midrib, which puts less lignin in the plant, makes it more highly digestible for the animals. You've got photoperiod sensitive, which that plant will not trigger the reproduction part until there's 12 hours and 20 minutes of daylight left, and so you can have really long season growth with the photoperiod sensitive. There's brachytic dwarf, where they figured out how to shrink the distance between the leaves, that internode leaf. So instead of having a 12-foot tall plant with 17 leaves, they can get that into a 7-foot tall plant with 17 leaves. So you have just as many leaves, but on a shorter plant, it stands up better. These are great if you want to have something standing to graze into the wintertime, so like a stockpile graze for your grass-finished animals. Really good things that you can use here. But again, they all need warm soils. First frost, they're all dead. Millet does not have any prussic acid concerns. With the sorghums, you do have to worry about prussic acid when you're grazing. So again, millet's a cheaper option. Short season, if you've got a really short period of time, that could be a good fit. And then as we move into the cool season grasses, of course, you're all familiar with cereal rye. It's the king of cover crops for a reason. It can be planted across such a huge window of time and opportunity. There's lots of different varieties. I don't know what you guys are using out here. We use Elbon, which is more of a warm southern type variety. I think one thing you guys should be looking at here is some of the hybrid rye. They do have hybrid rye now that is a huge yielder. 100 to 120 bushel hybrid rye. Now it's pretty tightly licensed and controlled, but KWS is the company that's doing this, and so we're set up as a dealer for them. So we can grow the hybrid rye, and then we're selling that second generation to farmers as a cover crop. You have to agree not to hay it, which for most people is not that big of a deal, or harvest it. You can graze it, but you can't harvest it mechanically. But the thing about it is it has huge amounts of tillering ability. And that's why I think you guys should look at it, because you might be able to cut your rates even more, because this thing tillers like crazy. In fact, when you're planting hybrid rye for the actual hybrid, they don't want you to have more than 800,000 seeds per acre, which is about 40 to 50% less than what a lot of other rye production would be, because this stuff just tillers like crazy. And so again, that only happens if you have a warm enough environment to happen. So for us, if we plant it in September, we can see those benefits. When we plant that in November, we don't see that benefit at all. It's still a good product, we just increase the seeding rate. But for you guys, if you get it in early enough and it has time, so, Zab, let me know if you want to try some of that. I think that would be fun to look at. Cereal, here's the incredible thing about cereal rye. It'll germinate in 34 degree soils. Nothing else does that. It will photosynthesize at 38 degrees in the sunshine. Nothing else does that. You are feeding your soil all winter long with this stuff, because it is the most winter active plant of any of these things up here. And that's why we love it so much, because it just has the ability to grow in these really cold conditions. Triticale, of course, is a cross between rye and wheat. And so it has characteristics of both parents. It's got a lot of these things that I just talked about with rye, but it's a much leafier product. Rye is great grazing early on. Once it puts a head on, those cattle are not going to be interested. They're going to want to move on to something else. And so you don't have as long of a grazing window with rye as what you would with wheat or triticale. So that's why triticale is really good, especially from a forage standpoint. Really, really good. If you're going to graze it, though, make sure you get beardless types. These beards can get really tough on cattle's eyes, and they can get caught in their mouth and throats and stuff. So make sure, they've got some good beardless varieties out there. That's the only ones that we carry. Annual ryegrass. Anybody here using annual ryegrass as a cover crop?
A few people use it.
Okay, yeah. Again, we have troubles getting it to overwinter in Nebraska unless we plant it pretty early. When I say that, by September 15th probably. Again, milder here, you probably get it to overwinter pretty well. And so it has about a fourth of the biomass above ground that cereal rye will have, but it will have just as big a root system. So if you don't want as much stuff that on top of the ground to have to plant through, but you still want all that benefit of that huge root system, this could be your guy. It is a little trickier, however, to terminate. You're not going to terminate this with a roller crimper, because it's got 4 foot of roots, for an 18-inch plant. You're going to have to chemically terminate this, and that can be challenging depending on weather conditions, because again, it's got a waxy leaf, it's got limited above ground and a huge root system. So it can be controlled chemically, but you got to get the timing right. There's not a lot of room to cheat when you're trying to do that, like you can on some other things. Oats, we love oats, we love barley. Again, just huge soil builders. They're great for mycorrhiza fungi. It's great for forage. It's relatively inexpensive seed. We do also carry these black winter oats. Your spring oats probably don't overwinter here for you consistently, but I bet these black oats probably would. And they're great. They're a great forage oat. And we have gone more and more to those black winter oats, just because it's got a longer window of growth, and it's more of a forage type instead of a grain type, which typically those forage types are always going to give you better soil benefits than the grain types. Barley, similar. Winter barley, we can't get winter barley to survive, so it would work really well for you guys here. I know there's a lot of barley used up and down the eastern part of the country here. Probably has more nutrition than oats, typically doesn't have quite as much biomass. So again, kind of depends on where you're landing on what you want to use there. Okay, so again, lots of species, legumes, grasses, but only 2 plant families. Brassicas, another plant family, lots of different brassicas. You're familiar with a number of them, you know, radishes, I don't have to talk too much about that, you know. This is what people like to show, but this is not like what I want. I would much rather have this in my field. If you show me a picture like this, I'll tell you a couple things. Number one, you had way too much carryover nitrogen in your field because you do not get that kind of growth unless you have a lot of nitrogen for that thing to scavenge. Number two, there wasn't much else planted around this or it would not have gotten that big. So we'd much rather see, you know, more of these types of things. So, you know, they're going to winter kill once you start dropping into the upper teens consistently. You may or may not want that. So, you know, you can determine if you want it to winter kill, if you want it to overwinter. They can be good grazing. They're not as good as some of these other things I'm going to show you, but they can work well. They do decompose pretty quickly. Turnips are going to be a better grazing crop. They're going to hold their nutrient value in that bulb better than the radish holds it in that tuber. Much smaller seeds. Radishes are going to typically be around 25,000 seeds per pound. All of these other brassicas, turnips, rapeseed, radish, mustards, they're going to be 170 to 180,000 seeds per pound. So quite small seed, but excellent, excellent grazing. Rapeseed, it's a type of canola. Again, this would overwinter very well for you. Some of these can be difficult to terminate if they overwinter and they start bolting on you, which means they start flowering. It can be difficult to control chemically because now that root is moving things up to the reproductive phase and it's hard to get the chemical to move down to kill the plant. Collards are one of our favorites if you're grazing. These collards are fantastic. There's a test here that we took. We took this test December 1st. These collards were in the snow. The collard tops tested almost 26% protein. So if you're grazing, you should be using some collards because they're the highest protein. They're a cross between a Georgia Southern collard, which, you know, the Southerners have used for years as a high protein green, and then a winter vegetable. Cabbage is one that you guys could consider here too. The thing that I like about this is even when it winter kills, it holds on to all its leaves. It doesn't break down like a radish or a turnip. So this could be something that could give you a higher, if you're needing to increase your carbon nitrogen ratio, this is going to be the highest C to N ratio of any brassica. So you can help adjust your mix by using this instead of a radish, which breaks down very quickly. This breaks down very slowly. So this could be something that you might want to add in there. And then mustards are a very fast growing, very quick growing, can help with nematode suppression. At our conference last week in Omaha, there was an organic guy that was showing, we're going to try this. He's planting his soybeans in 30-inch rows. He's interseeding mustard in between those rows, and he's letting that mustard get up, and some of this mustard will bloom in 30 days. Once it blooms, he's got an in-row roller, and he's going in there and he's just roller crimping that down, and then the beans canopy over it. But he's seeing great results with weed control and insect control, interseeding mustard with his soybeans. Thought that was pretty interesting, so we're definitely going to give that a try as well. Kale if you want something really cold tolerant. Okay, now we get into the fun stuff. So this is where you build diversity in plant families and not just within having lots of species. So the Asteraceae or the daisy family is one. Of course, sunflowers, you're all familiar with sunflowers. A lot of people say, I never have that in my cover crop mix because that's a weed. I had to cut that out of fields for years. Well, this is different than the sunflower, common sunflower that grows in fields as a weed. Black oil sunflowers can have 40% oil in the seed. So even if it makes seed, every bird, every cricket, every mouse, everything is going to want to eat this seed. You're not going to have issues with having a lot of volunteer sunflowers. We love it. It's cheap. It's a deep tap root. It really helps break up compaction layers. if you're planting any kind of a summer cover crop, this should be part of what you do. Now, also in that family is safflower. This could work for you yet if you're planting, so like some of your early stuff planting in September. This safflower may not overwinter, but you're gonna have to get probably down into the low teens to kill it. And so as a late summer planted cover crop for you guys, again, it's in this daisy family. It's going to have a deep taproot. It's not going to grow as tall as the sunflower, but it will have a nice taproot like that. And again, it's cheap. You know, for like 80 cents an acre, you can throw a pound of safflower in. And again, you're increasing your diversity of plant families, because every plant family is going to have different root architecture. It's going to have different root exudates. It's going to support different families of that soil biology. So you can add some of these things in. You just trickle them in at low rates because you're increasing the diversity without increasing the cost a lot. And most safflower is a thistle-y type. It's got spikes on it. What we have is baldy, and it's completely smooth. You can run your hand up and down that, and you get no thorns or thistles. It's a completely smooth type of safflower. So much preferred. Buckwheat. I would put buckwheat in any mix that you think you're going to have 6 weeks of growth before a frost on it. Because buckwheat grows faster than just about any other crop. It will not tolerate a frost, but it will grow very fast. It will be blooming in 30 days. It could be making viable seed in 6 to 7 weeks, so you got to be a little careful there. But the volunteer has never been an issue. We have buckwheat seed out all over the place all the time, and it's just not an issue. Again, you will have a lot of predation with insects and birds and things like that, but it's a beautiful white flower, hugely attractive to bees, other pollinators, and other insects, and it grows fast enough and it's cheap enough that, again, if you've got 5 to 6 weeks before a frost, I would put it in my mix. Again, a pound, maybe 2. You don't have to go crazy. If you need, if you're in a rotation where you just need to control weeds for 6 weeks, you can plant 30 pounds of buckwheat and it'll smother everything out there out. And then you roll it down. The thing about this is it will release more phosphorus from your soil than any other plant will. This does not associate with mycorrhizal fungi, so it has developed the right the acids from the roots to break down the phosphorus that other plants can't get to, makes it available, and then it makes it available for itself, and then it releases it to other plants. Phacelia, so buckwheat was in the Pogonaceae family. I don't even know how to pronounce half these. So that's a different family than sunflower and safflower. Phacelia is in the borage family. Again, this would be a great one if you want pollinator strips, if you've got bees. Phacelia is hard to beat for that.
That's a tough plant to grow in that area. I've tried it twice. That's a tough one.
Okay, do you think it's too wet?
Well, I think the timing wasn't right as far as.
When did you try planting it?
It was in the fall.
Yeah, needs to be planted in the spring if you want it to look like this. Yeah, we don't see a lot of it blooming when it's fall planted. Probably isn't going to overwinter for you. So if you're looking for a pollinator or bee pasture, do a spring planting with this in it. It'll do really well, I think. It's kind of expensive seed, so I would not include it in a lot of mixes unless you really had a good fit or a good window for it. Flax, love flax. Again, if you had, and this will not die with the first frost, it'll probably die when you drop into the low 20s, kind of like oats. Very long lasting residue. Probably the #1 best plant for hosting mycorrhizal fungal populations. So it doesn't get really big, but the thing we've seen about flax, it's never going to crowd other things out, but it rarely gets crowded out itself. It finds its little niche and it just kind of hangs in there. And Christine Jones says it's a plant that punches above its weight, because you go out there and you look and it's like, it's kind of a scrawny little plant. But the root system is doing great things. It helps tie all those other things together, partly because it's such a great host for mycorrhizal fungi, which then can, that mycorrhiza can go to all of the plants in your mix. Let's say it's not a very big plant, little tiny purplish blue flowers, long lasting residue. Again, a relatively inexpensive seed, so we like to see a pound or two of flax in anything that has a long enough growth window to work. So, you know, again, I would throw a pound or two of flax in for your September mixes. I wouldn't waste my money on it in a November mix for you guys here. Okra, it's in the cotton family, so you guys already have that diversity out here. Again, it needs a lot of heat, so this could be a summer plant. It's a good one for us back where we're at, where we don't grow cotton. We can get some of that diversity into our summer mixes there. And then the cucurbits family, squash and other cucurbits, we've got a different seed we can put in. These are really good for grazing. If you got grazing mixes, you can sprinkle these in. They can cover huge areas. We kind of like them to add the diversity. But of course, what we really like is adding all these things together in these mixes. You know, that's what we think we do really well is help people build these mixes where you're bringing together, you know, 8 to 10 species, but we want to try to see 5 to 6 families within that as well. So we look at both when we help you build a mix or when you're building your own mix. We have a tool online, Smart Mix Calculator. You can go on that. You can use it for free to look at all of this. You can just go to our website and get an account on that. So let's see, I think, yeah. And if you're grazing, and I know some of you have cattle in here, you know how well livestock do grazing these things. Can't be hardly beat for that. So I know I went through that really quickly. When we're out in the field at ZEPS later on, be happy to answer any questions about, you know, any of these species. Do we have any time at all for questions? Or?